and my colleague will make further answers in Swahili for the benefit of the Swahili listeners. You see, the issue of the land question, Hassan, when you talk about the land question, the land issue has been persisting since the pre-colonial time. If you remember, when the colonialists came into this country, the first item they did was to bring in settlers, and they forcefully acquired land from the indigenous Kenyans then resident. We have the issue of the settlers. We have the issues of the coastal strip. We have the question of the indigenous persons in terms of where the various tribal communities, boundaries and things like that were. So the question of land is not a very recent issue. So when you want to deal with this question, it has to be a comprehensive situation that we need to address in terms of both historical injustices, recent injustices, and continuing injustice that we have in the country. So when you ask, how do you discriminate? The question we have posed to the government is, have they looked at what is contained in the Tjrc report, in the Ndung'U report, the Mau Forest task force that was set out? Because these reports have detailed historical issues that ought to have been addressed by the government. And you cannot start addressing piecemeal situations to have a country deliberate on solutions. So for us to achieve a comprehensive and total rehabilitation of the land question and total settlement of the land question, we must look at where do we ail, where did we go wrong. And we are saying in this scenario is that the three phases of our land injustice situations, colonial, the post-independence means we have the Kenyatta era, then we have the Moi era. All these three eras had different land questions that affect the people, either in the colonial settlers or during the Kenyatta administration where land was dished out to his in our kitchen cabinet and other persons, or during the Moi time when land was allocated to persons who are perceived to be friendly to his regime. And these questions must be addressed for us to have a comprehensive solution. What we are doing right now is looking at a cosmetic solution to recent situations. If you remember the Ndung'U report, it never addressed historical and post-colonial injustices. We looked at mostly the issues that were raised during the Moi era. And we're saying for a comprehensive solution of the problems facing the land question in Kenya, we must have a comprehensive solution that encompasses every question, that will address comprehensively that land question without us having to revert piecemeal to certain, like what we said in the statement, knee-jerk solutions. Of course, when you go to the UK Mall, for example, or the Osho, or the Taj Mall on Embakasi South Road, these are just a few of the problems that we are facing. That's not the end. Because the riverian land in Nairobi, in all areas where either Nairobi and Ngong River or all the others, we have got so many structures that are on the river, on the riverian land. So it is not. You see, we in Kenya, post-colonial Kenya, we embarked on a solution where a win-win situation was being adapted. That is, we had the settlement land fund, where the British government loaned funds to Kenya, purpose of acquiring the settler land and then reverting it to the indigenous persons. And you see the settlement schemes that emanated or emerged soon thereafter settled certain people who are not really, which did not encompass every situation that was arising at the time. We tried to avoid the Zimbabwean situation, but that does not solve the problem. In the new Constitution 2010, we tried to cut down the then 999 and the freeholds that were held by foreigners to 99-year-old leasehold. in a way to try to have a solution to avoid the Zimbabwean solution, the situation. But then the land question remains. We have got a very large number of population in Kenya who are still squatters and landless. How do you address that? Because most of these people, either whether they were relocated from Central to the Rift Valley, or the Central to the coast, or from other areas, they also meet the indigenous persons there who now become landless, and they move on to the Mau forest. So the question is, how do you address this thing comprehensively? Not piecemeal, not part of the problem. We want a comprehensive solution. The Mau question arises because of the land question. The occupant of certain areas in the Rift Valley is because of the settlement, the settled situation that was created by the colonial government. Subsequent land that has been dished out in Kiambu, for example, and most parts of central Kenya, was occupying the settler land that was taken away from the indigenous people. Were they resettled back there? So that's the question that must be addressed, and which was raised in the Tjrc report. And we're asking the government, we have these resources that we have obtained from the public, whether they are not comprehensive. It is a reference point that we must ask ourselves, now that we have these reports, can we use them to set up a tribunal that is going to determine comprehensively the right between the government, the persons allocated, whether lawfully or unlawfully, or the mode of allocation, where we have these titles in the registries. What happens to them? So there must be a way to have these titles cancelled, and properly cancelled, and those who unlawfully or illegally sold this land to others be made to compensate them. So this, we're saying there must be some due process, not a question of you going into some, by issuing of a notice. A notice to demolish does not cancel the title, because a title can only be cancelled in a process set out in the Act. So if you cancel, what happens to the ground? The title still remains, because you have only demolished the structure, but the person is still holding the title. So that there is a fallback position right now if the government doesn't implement these positions. Other questions that we have raised are political. And the public needs to be aware that the leader of government business, the government itself, must be alive to these issues. We spent millions of shillings to collect data through the Ndung'U report and the Tjrc report. Who is affected by its non-implementation? Because there must be some people who have a vested interest in ensuring that the Tjrc report is not implemented. There is somebody out there who wants to have a piecemeal implementation of the Ndung'U report. So when you say we are discriminating, because the Ndung'u report highlights the hundreds of pages. The Ndung'U report has got hundreds of pages. And those persons there, we got almost 150 titles in Nairobi. We got almost 80 titles in Kisumu, Meru, Nakuru, in Nyeri, in Mombasa, which are all irregularly allocated, public titles. What is happening to them? You know, Upper Hill belong to the government. Are we dealing with it? The Kenya Railways properties, we are not dealt with those properties. So the question we must ask, and we must ask the government to think, if there is irregular or illegal allocation of land, it must all be reverted back to the government. If there is unlawful allocation of any process, there must be remedial measures. So we don't seek that there be piecemeal implementation of these processes, because there's some people, some fat cats, who own those titles, you know them. And we ask that their titles must be as affected as those at UK, Southend, Taj Mahal, and the others. So it's no question of piecemeal implementation. We want full implementation, because every Kenyan is affected by this. These are public utilities. If the toilets are occupied by petrol stations today, we want the toilets back in the city. Yeah, that's a simple thing. If markets were unlawfully allocated, they must be reverted back to the public. So, as a civil society organization, as a group of jurists, if the government does not implement the reports, we'll revert back to the activism mode that we've always done. We'll go back to court. We'll seek to, if, for example, the leader of the opposition or the leader of the majority does not come up with the necessary bills, we'll also try to assist them. We have the capacity to also draft similar measures to try and see if they can have them presented in Parliament for adoption. Otherwise, we'll only have the last option is to go back to court. We'll go back to court and try to deal with the issues. We can deal with this.
Yeah. The Ndung'u report, for example, did consider over 1,880 properties. Over 1,880 properties. Some of these properties related to bypasses, some of these properties related to riparian land, some of them related to public utility properties. And the recommendations were also creative. The recommendations were for those properties that are not yet developed, those titles were to be revoked. The reason why we say that the current measure we are seeing of demolitions is illegal is we cannot assume in instances where an individual is holding a title, you cannot just assume it was public property and you go and start demolishing. That title, the validity of the title has to be established. It has to either be revoked or confirmed before the state now moves in to say this is public property and we don't care what sits on it. And that is why we are saying the ad hoc nature of the demolitions is not in public interest. A practical example is the determination of the riparian. So if you determine that there is a building on a riparian land, you have to determine the entire riparian. Don't just determine one side, the other side you leave it. Go to the UK, Nakumatt UK, they demolished on one side. If they are creating 30-meter wide riparian, what about the other side of the river? And if then we are going that way, then they need to do the entire stretch of the river, not just one property. So we are saying that we welcome the renewed vigor towards recovering public lands, but it has to be done within the confines of the rule of law and due process.